The House Armed Services Committee passed a $500 billion defense bill, $554 billion to be exact, meeting some considerable resistance from the president and his defense secretary, Leon Panetta, who claims it's $4 billion over current deficit reduction targets.
When Congress restores funds to protect particular constituencies that may not be critical to our national defense capabilities, then they risk upending the kind of careful balance that we've worked very hard to achieve. And it could harm our ability to pursue the high priority investments that we think are essential to the force that we need for the 21st century.
Well, joining us now, Congressman Randy Forbes, member of the House Armed Services Committee. Great to have you here. The defense secretary, he was so excited and emotional there, you probably might have missed it, saying basically you guys are being irresponsible, changing the mix in defense spending, risking the nation's national security.
Yeah, Lou, his position on this is evolving a lot, just kind of like the president's is on a lot of issues.
A lot of that going on.
A lot of that going on. And, you know, one of the things that they have even testified, including the Secretary of Defense, is that if these huge cuts go into the military, we're talking about putting in almost $1 trillion of cuts over the next 10 years. According to the Air Force, they say they will be on the ragged edge. Not good for us. Navy says they'll have fewer ships than we've had in 100 years. We're talking about laying off 150 to 200,000 men and women in uniform, which, as you know, would be like doing away with the entire Marine Corps. And then in addition to that,
a little more than the Marine Corps
even the
now.
Secretary has said we're talking about a loss of 1.5 million jobs across the country.
So how in the world, why would you guys have ever agreed to the super committee sequestration? I love that, first of all. What a name for what is turning out to be farce. How did you ever get here?
Well, first of all, Lou, I'm glad you asked that because I never did agree to it. I voted against it and I spoke against it, and I told them at the time this is where we would be if we passed that. Fortunately, I think a lot of people are starting to realize now the huge impact this is going to have, not just on the economic impact, but the strategic impact on the country.
We've got the defense secretary complaining about $4 billion more. Thereby risking so much, in his view. I know you and your committee think that's a little peculiar. The country thinks it's peculiar. First of all, you guys, the Republicans, for pushing through something that amounts to a $4 billion difference. I understand the intricacies within that. But then the defense secretary worried about $4 billion when we're talking about a $1.3 trillion deficit this year.
Yeah.
I mean, this is getting...
But, Lou, let me tell you the other thing. I wish he'd have been as concerned when they passed that $825 billion so-called stimulus package.
Right.
Because if you took that package and the $347 billion of interest it cost, that's the exact overlay of the defense cuts they're now proposing. So they took that money, spent it in 1 year, gone down the drain, and now they're putting it on the backs of the men and women who serve and fight us. And, Lou, you hear a lot today about this 1%. Well, 1% of our men and women are fighting to defend the rest of this country. They're the true 1%. They stand up for us every day. It's time we stand up for them. And they're also trying to put it on the backs of our veterans. We just think that's the wrong priority.
To put it on the back of our veterans, to put it on the back of the men and women serving the country in uniform around the world, we're talking about further reduction in sea power. Further reduction in our land forces. What has gripped Washington? Because the challenges are not diminishing even with the end of the Iraq War.
Lou, it's a couple things. One is we're not doing any long-term analysis like we used to do. Everything is 6-month planning instead of 5 and 10 years. And you know when it comes to defense, we don't plan for tomorrow, 6 months, or 2 years from now. We're planning for 5 and 10 years down the road. And the second thing is it's a matter of setting our priorities.
We're showing the number of our troops stationed around the world, huge numbers. We're showing the nuclear submarine fleet. And it is closely, that gap is being closed by Russia and China.
And can I tell you a scary...
And India is coming on strong.
But let me tell you a scary thing. In 8 years, the Chinese will outnumber us 78 to 32 in submarines in the Pacific. Right now, if you took surface-to-surface missiles, they can hit one of our ships at 185 kilometers. We can only hit theirs at 120 kilometers. They're developing stealth aircraft. We have tore up our production line for the F-22. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about with setting our priorities and doing long-term planning.
And what are we doing about it? This country can't continue to put up with the nonsense that we're getting out of. The generals in Washington, D.C., sitting in the Pentagon, have led us into the longest conflict in the country's history without victory. We are looking at a naval fleet that is being diminished to the point that, arguably will be a disadvantage to an emerging nation. I mean, this is madness.
The two things we need to do, Lou, first of all, is give the American people information, and it's two types. We have called for the audit of the Department of Defense because the American people have the right to know where they're spending their money, how much money they're spending. The law requires that. They've just refused to do it. We're going to insist that they do it. Second thing is we want to then set our priorities and say, what do we need to do long term to make sure we're guaranteeing the defense of this country and the U.S. interest around the world? And that I don't believe we've been doing.
And you're on a tour, Defend the Defenders?
We're going across the country to have this same kind of debate. It's defendingourdefenders.com. They can go on and get this kind of information. We'll be in 20-some states with people coming out from all across the country talking about just these issues. We think it's something that we need to do before November because it's an important thing for the direction of the country.
Congressman, always good to talk with you.
Lou,
thanks for being here.
Talk with you. Thank you.
Up next, coal.